When will I, as a licensed land surveyor, sign and seal or stamp a survey work product that's been prepared by a civil engineer or the civil engineer's team? The answer to that question is almost never. There are maybe a very few limited exceptions to that general rule. I have done a few times, I have done that, but I don't do it very often. Almost never do it. But I'm asked all the time, not all the time, but I'm asked regularly by civil engineers to do that. They say, hey, they'll send me a survey work product and say, hey, could you sign and seal this for me? I usually always tell them no. Why is the engineer asking that? Well, to answer that question, you got to understand a little bit about California law. So in my home state of California, we don't let civil engineers do their own surveying anymore as a general rule, especially boundary surveying. If you want to do boundary surveying in California, you have to be a licensed surveyor. And we changed that law. That law changed in 1982. Why did we change the law? Well, we changed the law because most civil engineers aren't very good boundary surveyors. So now if you're a civil engineer and you want to survey boundaries, you have to at least go in and pass the same licensing exam that all the boundary surveyors have to pass. And that doesn't mean there aren't bad boundary surveyors. There are bad boundary surveyors. But as a general rule, the surveying that was done by civil engineers, boundary surveying, was so crummy that in 1982 we changed the law and took that privilege away from them. So what that means is now is that we have companies with civil engineers and no land surveyors, and they want to get a work product signed and sealed, and they need that done by a land surveyor. So that's when I get asked. And I've been surprised at the number of times in my career when I've basically been asked to just, we call it rubber stamp, which is just sign and seal a work product prepared by a civil engineer that you don't really know anything about. I remember about a year or two ago, I was asked by a civil engineer at a fairly reputable large engineering firm if I would just rubber stamp a subdivision map, and I told him no, and he didn't understand why. He said, there's a surveyor in Sacramento that lets the rubber stamp stuff for me all the time, and every time I use the stamp, he charges me $500. And I said, well, I'm not that kind of surveyor. I suggest you call your guy in Sacramento if that's what you want. So I am surprised at how many times I've been asked by civil engineers from fairly reputable engineering companies to kind of whitewash their product. So I don't do that. I almost always refuse. So why? Why is that? There's a couple reasons. The first thing you want to understand is it legal for me to do that as a licensed land surveyor? Can I just sign and seal a work product prepared by an engineer? So the answer to that question about legality is most of the time, no, it's not legal. There are some limited circumstances in which it may be legal for me as a licensed land surveyor to sign and seal a work product prepared by a civil engineer. So, but those are limited circumstances. So that's one of the main reasons why I don't typically do that. I don't sign and seal work products prepared by civil engineers because it's not legal. It's illegal. And at my company, we follow the law. We work very hard to do that. So when is it legal for me as a land surveyor to sign and seal or stamp a survey work product that's been prepared by a civil engineer? 3 things have to happen in order for that to be legal for me in California. Okay? Number 1 is I got to know about the work product ahead of time. You can't send me the work product when it's finished and then ask me to sign and seal it. That's illegal. Okay, and I had an example. This just happened to me. It was about a week ago. I got a land description and a plat that was prepared by a civil engineer that I didn't know anything about. And it showed up in my inbox and he said, would you please sign and seal this for me? This is a client that I work with on a fairly regular basis. He should know better. And I had to respond to his email and say, I'm sorry, I can't sign and seal this. I don't know what we're doing. I don't know who it's for. I don't know how you prepared it. And no, I'm not gonna just sign and seal this for you. I mean, that's an uncomfortable conversation to have with a client, right? I mean, this is a client we've done a lot of work for in this last year, and that was uncomfortable for me, but I had to tell him, I can't sign and seal this. It's not legal for me to sign a product this way. So I got to know ahead of time what you're doing, right? And that ties into reason number 2. Okay, this is the second the second reason or the second element that you have to have for it to be legal for me to sign an engineer's work product, and that is I've got to have input on the process. So I need to have some input on the methods we're going to use and the process or the workflow that we're going to follow to create the work product. If I don't do that, then I can't reasonably tell the licensing board that I was in what they call responsible charge of the work, that I actually was supervising the work. And that's part of the reason why I got to know ahead of time. If I don't know ahead of time, then I can't have any input into the process, right? So those are the first two elements that I need to have. I need to know ahead of time. I need to have input into the process. And then the third thing is I need to be able to peer review the finished product, right? So I have to make sure that it meets reasonable technical standards, the work that's been done. If I can do all three of those things, if I have all three of those elements, then it may be legal for me to sign and seal a survey work product that was prepared by a civil engineer or their team. However, even if it is legal, that doesn't mean it's a good idea, right? So legal and a good business idea are not the same things, right? So I got to evaluate a lot of other things, my liability, what I'm being paid to review and sign seal the product. Did the engineers team do a good job? So, one of the things I really have to ask myself when that request comes in from a civil engineer is, did the civil engineer really know what they were doing when they prepared the work product? And I find in my practice, most of the time, the answer to that question is no. Most civil engineers do not know how to survey. They don't. They're not good surveyors. That's why we changed the law in 1982 and told them they couldn't do it anymore. So most of the time, if you're a civil engineer, I'm going to tell you, you shouldn't be surveying anyways. You need to let my team do that work, right? We have the expertise. So on a side note, just for my land surveyors that might be watching the video, from a legal and liability perspective, I think it's harder to demonstrate that you're really in responsible charge for survey work that's performed outside of your organization. So it's one thing if you're a licensed surveyor, and let's say you're signing and sealing a product that was prepared by a civil engineering technician in your own organization. I think that's a slightly different situation than it is if you are signing and sealing a work product that was prepared by civil engineering tech outside of your organization. I think once you move outside of your own organization, that bar to prove that you're in responsible charge, that you're really supervising the work, I think that's a higher bar to meet. Okay, so my final thought on this is, for my land surveyors, is if you have a civil engineering client that's asking you to just sign and seal a work product that you really didn't have involvement with, that is a strong indication that civil engineer doesn't really value your expertise. They're just trying to check a box, right? All they care about is your stamp. They don't really see the value that you bring to a design project as a land surveyor. And in my opinion, that means that civil engineer probably isn't a good client. So don't, if you're a civil engineer, don't, or an architect, doesn't matter, any kind of design professional, don't call a good land surveyor and ask them to just sign and seal your work product. They're not going to do that. If they're a good surveyor, they're going to ask for those three things we talked about. They're going to want to know ahead of time, they're going to want to have input into the process, and they're going to want an opportunity to peer review, and that's reasonable. And even if they get those three things, still doesn't mean it's a good idea.